Long before coffee became a daily ritual or a global industry, it was a mysterious berry growing wild in the highlands of Ethiopia, sparking legends, fueling revolutions, and shaping civilizations. From the myth of dancing goats to the intellectual sparks of Enlightenment Europe, coffee has been more than just a beverage. It has been a catalyst for thought, trade, conflict, and connection. This journey through the origins and history of coffee uncovers how a humble bean transformed empires, inspired artists, sustained workers, and ignited ideas that changed the world, one cup at a time. A journey brewed through time, from sacred highlands to bustling metropolises, from whispered revolutions to roaring factories. The story of coffee is the story of civilization itself. It begins humbly, in the green forests of Ethiopia, where a curious goatherd observed the strange, joyful dance of his goats. But from those quiet origins, coffee spread like wildfire, across deserts and oceans, through temples and palaces, into the hands of mystics, monarchs, merchants, and revolutionaries. Coffee is not just a drink, it's a lens. Through it, we can trace the contours of empires, the rise of capitalism, the dawn of the Enlightenment, and the pulse of modern industrial society. Each cup tells a tale of discovery and desire, of commerce and conquest, of resistance and ritual. Whether served in an ornate Ottoman palace or a Parisian café, whether brewed over a campfire or on a factory floor, coffee has been a silent companion to humanity's greatest transformations. In this exploration, we will journey through the origins and history of coffee, from legend to legacy, uncovering how a single bean came to shape so much of our cultural, spiritual, and political history. We'll meet mystics and monarchs, smugglers and scientists, thinkers and revolutionaries, all brought together by the intoxicating aroma and clarity of mind that coffee offers. This is more than a timeline. It's a rich, aromatic narrative of human connection and creativity, brewed over centuries. Discovery of coffee. Kaldi and the Dancing Goats. What if the origins of one of the world's most beloved beverages began not in palaces or marketplaces, but on a quiet hillside, among a herd of dancing goats? So begins one of the most enduring legends in human history, the tale of Kaldi, a humble goatherd from the lush, forested highlands of 9th century Ethiopia, whose curious encounter with a mysterious red berry would ignite a global transformation. As the story goes, Kaldi led his goats to graze as usual, but one day noticed something peculiar. They became unusually animated, prancing, bleating, and almost performing what looked like a joyful dance. The cause? Bright red cherries from a strange, wild shrub they had been nibbling. Intrigued by their odd behavior, Kaldi tasted the berries himself and soon felt a surge of vitality and euphoria course through his body. It was unlike anything he had experienced before. He was energized, alert, alive. Early coffee use in Ethiopia. Before coffee became a global obsession or commodity traded by empires, it was a sacred thread woven into the daily rhythms of Ethiopian tribal life. A symbol of nourishment, spirituality, and community. Ethiopia is not only the geographic birthplace of coffee, but also the cradle of its first human use. In the misty highland rainforests of the Kaffa region, whose name directly influenced the modern word coffee, wild Coffea arabica trees flourished, their red cherries ripening beneath the canopy of ancient trees. In these early days, coffee was not consumed as a hot beverage. Instead, its use was functional and deeply tied to survival. Local tribes ground the raw or lightly roasted beans and mixed them with animal fat or clarified butter, forming dense, nutrient-rich balls. These proto-energy bars were carried by warriors, hunters, and long-distance herders who needed sustenance on journeys through rugged terrain. The highlands' isolation preserved these practices for generations, and coffee became both food and medicine, a source of endurance, warmth, and clarity in a challenging environment. Among Ethiopia's many ethnic groups, particularly the Oromo and Gala people, coffee was regarded not merely as a stimulant but as a spiritual plant. It was often used in traditional healing practices, blessings, and tribal rituals. Stories passed down orally over centuries describe coffee as a gift from the gods, offering protection, courage, and strength. The earliest liquid form of coffee wasn't brewed from roasted beans, but instead made by fermenting the sweet pulp of the coffee cherry, resulting in a mildly alcoholic beverage. This early preparation bears more resemblance to wine than to the coffee we know today, yet it marked a crucial shift, from food to drink, from fuel to ritual. By the 13th and 14th centuries, more sophisticated techniques for roasting, grinding, and boiling coffee began to emerge in the Ethiopian highlands. This led to the rise of a profoundly significant tradition that endures to this day, the Ethiopian coffee ceremony. In this highly symbolic ritual, the woman of the house, typically the hostess, begins by roasting green beans over an open flame, filling the room with their rich aroma. The beans are then hand-ground, boiled in a jabena, a traditional clay coffee pot, and poured into small, handleless cups. The ceremony is far more than a means of caffeine consumption. It is an act of hospitality, a sacred social gathering. Guests are expected to stay for 3 rounds of coffee, abal, tona, and baraka, each symbolizing transformation, unity, and blessing. Conversations flow as incense burns, and coffee is served with popcorn, bread, or roasted grains. It is in these moments, shared between neighbors, family members, and elders, that coffee reinforces communal bonds and cultural continuity. Even today, in both rural villages and modern Ethiopian homes, the coffee ceremony remains a cornerstone of identity. It is an offering of peace, respect, and connection. Coffee here is not fast, nor is it transactional. It is slow, intentional, and deeply relational. It reflects Ethiopia's enduring philosophy that life, like coffee, is best appreciated slowly, one sip at a time. In this context, coffee was never merely a stimulant. It was, and still is, a living symbol of togetherness, survival, memory, and celebration. Long before the world came to know espresso bars and flat whites, Ethiopia had already discovered that the true magic of coffee lies in its ability to bring people together, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Overcome with wonder, Kaldi carried a handful of the berries to a nearby monastery, hoping the monks could make sense of their magical effects. The monks, however, were suspicious. Believing the berries to be the work of the devil, they threw them into the fire. But as the beans crackled in the flames, they released an aromatic scent so enchanting that the monks quickly retrieved them from the embers, ground them up, and dissolved them in hot water. Thus, according to legend, the world's first cup of roasted coffee was born. Once brewed, the monks found the drink invaluable. It helped them stay awake during long nights of prayer and meditation, enhancing focus and warding off fatigue. Word of this mystical drink spread from monastery to monastery, eventually reaching far beyond Ethiopia's borders. While there is no historical documentation to confirm Kaldi's existence, his story persists because it captures something essential about coffee's allure: its power to awaken the mind and spirit. Whether true or symbolic, the legend of Kaldi and the dancing goats reflects the earliest understanding of coffee not just as a food or drink, but as a divine stimulant, a gift from nature that could elevate both the body and soul. Moreover, Kaldi's tale speaks to the serendipitous relationship between humans and nature. It reminds us that some of the most profound discoveries begin with curiosity and observation, not from grand experiments or imperial ambition, but from one person simply paying attention to the world around them. This myth laid the groundwork for centuries of spiritual, cultural, and social developments tied to coffee. The theme of coffee as an aid to mental clarity, religious devotion, and inner discipline would echo across Islamic, Christian, and later Enlightenment traditions, making Kaldi's moment not just a quaint tale, but a symbolic genesis of the coffee journey that continues to shape the modern world. Coffee's spread to the Islamic world by the 15th century, coffee had crossed the Red Sea into Yemen, where Sufi mystics embraced it to aid in nocturnal rituals and meditative chants. This marked the beginning of coffee's religious and intellectual role in Islamic culture. Known as kahwa, meaning to suppress appetite, coffee was prized for its energizing effects and was believed to elevate spiritual consciousness. Yemen became the world's first hub for organized coffee cultivation. The port city of Mocha emerged as a global export center, and the Yemeni method of roasting and boiling beans set the standard for centuries. As pilgrims passed through Mecca and Medina, they spread coffee's fame across the Islamic world, from Cairo to Damascus to Baghdad. However, coffee's stimulating properties and popularity in informal gatherings aroused suspicion. Some conservative scholars issued fatwas against it, and coffeehouses were at times closed or surveilled. Nonetheless, coffee's ability to inspire clarity, discipline, and companionship allowed it to become part of the spiritual, social, and economic fabric of Islamic life. Coffee in the Ottoman Empire. By the time coffee reached the heart of the Ottoman Empire, it was no longer just a beverage, it was a force. A force of culture, conversation, community, and even controversy. Introduced to Istanbul in the mid-16th century, likely around 1555, by Syrian traders from Aleppo and Damascus, coffee took root quickly in a society that valued poetry, storytelling, social ritual, and hospitality. The city's first documented coffeehouse, Kahvehane, opened not far from the Grand Bazaar, founded by two enterprising merchants who recognized the potential of this dark, aromatic drink to captivate a bustling, cosmopolitan audience. These kahvehanes were unlike anything the Ottoman public had seen before. Neither taverns nor mosques, they formed a new kind of public sphere, a space where strangers became equals, gathered around steaming cups to engage in discussion, games of backgammon, recitations of folktales and epic poetry, or simply quiet reflection. Coffeehouses quickly spread throughout the empire, from Cairo to Sarajevo, Baghdad to Mecca, becoming epicenters of urban life. Unlike the structured confines of courts or religious institutions, kahvehanes offered something radical: freedom of thought and expression. They served no alcohol, but their potency lay in their power to awaken minds and ideas. At the Ottoman court, coffee rose to even greater significance. A prestigious palace role was created, the kahvesibasi, or chief coffee maker, an elite position held by a trusted eunuch who prepared and served coffee to the sultan himself. This wasn't just about taste, it was about ceremony, trust, and timing. Serving coffee correctly was a matter of imperial dignity. Missteps could cost one's status, or worse. Coffee also seeped into private and domestic life. Among the elite and middle classes, coffee drinking became a ritual of refinement, often accompanied by ornate silver cups, zarf, sweet confections, and intricate serving trays. In Ottoman households, a woman's ability to brew coffee was considered an essential part of her marriageability. So central was coffee to marital expectations that a woman could, by accepted custom and sometimes even legal grounds, divorce her husband if he failed to provide coffee regularly, a remarkable early symbol of personal agency in a patriarchal society. Yet not everyone was thrilled about the rise of coffee. As its popularity soared, so too did concern among the political and religious elite. Coffeehouses became places where news traveled fast, where satire was spoken freely, and where dissent could brew just as easily as coffee. Sultans and clerics feared these gatherings could foster rebellion, sedition, or simply moral decay. One of the most dramatic responses came from Sultan Murad IV, who in the early 17th century imposed strict bans on coffee. Believing it encouraged idleness, intoxication of the mind, and anti-state sentiment, Murad ordered coffeehouses shut down. He reportedly disguised himself and roamed the streets of Istanbul, enforcing the ban personally. The punishment for breaking the coffee prohibition? For some, it was public flogging; for others, death by drowning or decapitation. But coffee was resilient, more so than politics. Despite crackdowns, underground coffeehouses flourished. People brewed coffee in private homes, on rooftops, in hidden courtyards. Public demand and cultural attachment proved stronger than imperial control. Eventually, the bans lifted, and coffee returned not just as a drink, but as a cultural institution woven into the Ottoman identity. By the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire had fully embraced coffee as a marker of both elegance and everyday life. It was served during diplomatic receptions, celebrated in poetry and song, and immortalized in ornate ceramics and copperware. The phrase, "A cup of coffee commits 1 to 40 years of friendship," became a proverbial expression of the enduring bonds created over shared cups. In the end, coffee did what few things could. It transcended class, religion, and geography. It flowed from the palaces of sultans to the tents of nomads, from the kitchens of brides to the whispers of dissidents. In doing so, it helped define a uniquely Ottoman way of life, rich in ritual, expressive in dialogue, and above all, awake. European coffeehouses and the Enlightenment. When coffee first arrived in Europe in the 17th century, it did more than awaken the senses, it awakened the mind. At a time when Europe was beginning to emerge from the shadow of religious absolutism and monarchic control, coffee offered not only a stimulating beverage but a space for ideas to thrive. Introduced by Venetian traders and spread by the influence of the Dutch East India Company, coffee quickly displaced beer and wine as the morning drink of choice, replacing sedation with stimulation and passivity with participation. At first, the arrival of this dark, exotic liquid aroused suspicion. Church authorities, wary of its effects and Islamic origin, denounced it as the bitter invention of Satan. But when Pope Clement VIII was asked to ban it, legend says he tasted a cup, declared it so delicious it would be a sin to let only infidels enjoy it, and baptized it instead. With that papal approval, coffee was unleashed across the continent. Coffee houses began opening in major cities: Oxford, 1650, London, 1652, Paris, 1671, and Vienna, 1683, and soon multiplied by the hundreds. They were unlike taverns or salons. Here, one could buy a cup for a penny and gain access to lively discussion, printed news, and revolutionary thought. Hence their nickname, penny universities. In these caffeine-fueled havens, the Enlightenment was brewed. Philosophers like Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau debated the social contract and natural rights. Scientists like Isaac Newton mulled gravity and alchemy between sips. Benjamin Franklin, while in London, used coffeehouses to gather political intelligence and spread revolutionary ideas. These spaces fostered journalism, birthed modern insurance and finance systems. Lloyd's of London and the London Stock Exchange both trace their roots to coffeehouses. Coffee became the drink of reason, order, and dialogue, a counterpoint to the fog of alcohol. And in that clarity, Europe changed, one sip at a time. Coffee in the age of colonialism. As Europe's thirst for coffee intensified, the bean became more than a beverage, it became an instrument of empire. The early supply chains, controlled by Arab traders through Yemen's port of Mocha, could not meet the exploding demand. European powers, desperate to break the monopoly and enrich themselves, took coffee cultivation global, often with brutal consequences. The Dutch were the first to transplant coffee trees outside Arabia, establishing plantations in Java, Indonesia, by 1699. The French, with seeds smuggled from Dutch greenhouses, launched plantations in Martinique, Haiti, and Réunion. The Portuguese and Spanish did the same in Brazil, Colombia, and Cuba. As the bean crossed the oceans, so too did Europe's colonial machinery, land seizure, forced labor, and ecological exploitation. Coffee cultivation in the colonies relied on enslaved Africans and indigenous peoples, coerced to work under brutal conditions. In Saint-Domingue, Haiti, enslaved laborers produced nearly half the world's coffee by the late 1700s, until the Haitian Revolution overturned both the plantation economy and French rule. The landscape itself was transformed. Forests were cleared, ecosystems disrupted, and native agriculture displaced to make way for single-crop economies, an arrangement that made colonies economically dependent and vulnerable to global price shocks. And yet, this ruthless expansion globalized coffee. It turned a sacred Ethiopian drink into a mass commodity consumed in European parlors and parlamentos, American diners, and Asian teahouses. The plantation model, born in this era, still dominates the coffee industry today, leaving behind a legacy of inequality and environmental strain. History of coffee in the Americas. The Americas did not just grow coffee, they were transformed by it. By the early 18th century, coffee had taken root in the Caribbean and South America, shaping economies, class systems, and political revolutions alike. In Brazil, the now famous legend tells of Lieutenant Francisco de Melo Palheda, who seduced the wife of the French Guanan governor to smuggle coffee seeds back to Brazil in a bouquet of flowers. Whether myth or truth, what followed is undeniable. By the 19th century, Brazil had become the world's largest coffee producer, a position it still holds, thanks to its vast land, labor force, and climatic advantage. This dominance came at a cost. Brazil's coffee boom relied heavily on slave labor, with millions of enslaved Africans toiling on sprawling fazendas, plantations. Even after abolition in 1888, working conditions remained harsh for freed workers and immigrants. Elsewhere, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, and El Salvador developed powerful coffee sectors that enriched local elites while fostering deep inequality. Coffee republics were born, nations whose political systems and infrastructures were tied to coffee exports, often to the detriment of democratic development. Land concentration, labor unrest, and U.S. intervention became recurring themes across the region. In contrast, the United States, while not a producer, became the world's largest consumer by the 20th century. American demand drove global production patterns and helped shape coffee into a modern, industrialized commodity, complete with advertising, branding, and a place on every breakfast table. The role of coffee in the Industrial Revolution. With the rise of machines came the need for mental clarity, speed, and endurance, and coffee delivered. During the Industrial Revolution, the nature of work changed fundamentally. Long hours in factories, structured shifts, and repetitive tasks demanded a new kind of fuel. Alcohol, once the drink of choice even at breakfast, dulled productivity. Coffee sharpened it. In rapidly growing cities, coffeehouses became gathering places not for thinkers and poets, but for clerks, typists, laborers, and managers. It was in these urban hubs that coffee became democratized, a working-class beverage that offered focus, warmth, and routine. Factory owners, recognizing coffee's benefits, began providing it to workers during breaks. This marked the beginning of the coffee break culture, which would become institutionalized in corporate life. By the late 19th century, percolators became common in middle-class homes. By the mid-20th century, instant coffee revolutionized convenience, aligning perfectly with modern values of speed and efficiency. Coffee was no longer just a stimulant, it was an emblem of modernity, a symbol of the new rhythm of urban life. Coffee during wartime, World War I and World War II. In the chaos and deprivation of war, coffee became both comfort and necessity. During World War I, coffee was included in military rations for soldiers enduring the horrors of trench warfare. Its warmth offered psychological solace, its caffeine provided wakefulness during long night watches. When coffee supplies dwindled, soldiers and civilians turned to chicory blends or substitutes, revealing just how deeply embedded coffee had become. By World War II, coffee had evolved into a strategic commodity. The U.S. government rationed it domestically to ensure soldiers had ample supply. Instant coffee, including Nescafé and Maxwell House, was issued to American GIs in their field kits, sparking brand loyalty that would last decades. These pocket-sized packets became a part of soldier identity, shared in foxholes and mess tents across Europe and the Pacific. In Germany and occupied territories, real coffee was a luxury. Citizens often turned to roasted acorns, barley, or chicory as ersatz alternatives. Meanwhile, in occupied France, café culture quietly persisted underground. Intellectuals, resistance fighters, and artists met in dimly lit coffeehouses, where whispers of freedom passed from table to table. In wartime, coffee was more than a drink, it was resilience in a cup. Coffee and revolution. Political movements in cafés across centuries and continents. Revolutions didn't just erupt in battlefields, they were brewed in cafés. From the candlelit tables of 18th century Paris to the smoky dens of 20th century Havana, coffeehouses served as incubators of rebellion, forums for dissidents, and sanctuaries for radical thought. In pre-revolutionary France, the cafés of Paris teemed with debate. The philosopher Diderot met with contributors to the Encyclopédie, while revolutionary pamphlets circulated under the radar of the crown. In the Habsburg Empire, Viennese cafés were intellectual sanctuaries where dissidents like Freud, Trotsky, and Kafka met to write and reflect. In London, coffeehouses were places where Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels discussed the Communist Manifesto. In Cuba, Fidel Castro and his fellow revolutionaries planned resistance over coffee. In America, smoky espresso bars became the backdrop for beatniks, jazz poets, civil rights activists, and anti-war protesters, spaces where new generations challenged the status quo. Even in the 21st century, coffeehouses remained spaces of quiet revolution. From student protests in Tehran, to pro-democracy discussions in Hong Kong, to climate organizing in Berlin, the café continues to be a place where movements begin, not with marches, but with minds, ideas, and mugs. More than a beverage, a global culture, coffee's journey from a wild cherry in Ethiopian forests to the centerpiece of global culture is nothing short of extraordinary. Along its path, it has sparked revolutions, empowered economies, reshaped societies, and fueled the minds of some of history's most influential thinkers and leaders. In palaces and prisons, on battlefields and boulevards, coffee has been more than a drink. It has been a constant, a catalyst, and a conversation. Its story is one of contradictions, of beauty and exploitation, of ritual and rebellion, of comfort and commerce. It has bound together the sacred and the secular, the poetic and the political. Whether served in a small ceramic cup during an Ethiopian ceremony or sipped from a paper cup in a Manhattan rush hour, coffee remains a unifier across time, geography, and class. Today, as we enter a new chapter of coffee culture, defined by sustainability, specialty roasting, fair trade, and global connectivity, we are reminded that this humble being continues to evolve with us. And as long as there are stories to tell, questions to ask, and dreams to chase, there will be coffee. Always coffee.